Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest, Sarah Leary. Sarah is a venture partner at Unusual Ventures with a focus on Unusual's consumer practice. She is specifically interested in investing in opportunities that tap into the power of community, marketplaces, and social networks. This may come as no surprise given Sarah's previous experience. Sarah co-founded Nextdoor, the world's largest private social network of neighborhoods, used by over 75 million members in over 285,000 neighborhoods across 11 countries. Sarah led product, marketing, growth, and international expansion over 10 years at Nextdoor. Before Nextdoor, Sarah started her career at Microsoft and served as a vice president of product and marketing at Epinions and shopping.com before the company was sold to eBay. Sarah received her bachelor's degree from Harvard College and her MBA from Harvard Business School. While at Harvard, she also captained the Harvard women's lacrosse team and won a national championship. Sarah, it is such an honor. Thanks for coming on the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and it's a huge honor for me to be on the podcast with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So Sarah, first set the scene. Where are you in the world? What is your work situation like? What's going on?
Well, I am back in the office, and I'm actually working out of Boston, which is where I'm from originally, after spending 22 years living in the Bay Area. I think one of the things that came out of COVID was return to my roots. So it's been fun to be here, spending more time in Boston.
I love it. So speaking of roots, what I love to do is go back to 5-year-old Sarah, maybe 10-year-old Sarah.
Ooh.
What was your childhood like? Tell me a little bit about who you were. What did you want to be when you grew up? Things like that.
Well, I was definitely, if you ask my mother, I was a rambunctious little kid, very active and high energy, maybe more energy than you might have wanted in your 5, 10-year-old self, and certainly if you were the mother of 4 children. So I'm the oldest of 4. And my parents figured out early on that busy Sarah was a happy Sarah. So I was very active, very involved, and frankly, sports became a big part of my childhood, in part because I think my mom wanted me out of the house and wanted me running as much as possible. So I would fall asleep at night and probably get out of her hair. And so I was very blessed to just be not only in our own family, but part of a large extended family that was very close, and a focus on school education, as well as participating in as many activities as a young kid as I could fit into my schedule.
Yeah. And so obviously, like I said in the intro, you played lacrosse at Harvard. So won a national championship, obviously excelled in lacrosse, captained the women's lacrosse team, and then obviously went to Harvard, right? Not a bad school. So tell me a little bit about maybe high school. How are you navigating that in terms of balancing, I want to go play D1 and sports versus also go to a great academic institution?
It's a great question, and obviously I think many things have changed over the course of the last few decades. But I played 3 sports in high school. In fact, I didn't start playing lacrosse until I got to high school, and I was playing soccer, I was playing basketball, I played some competitive golf. And I just loved being a part of a team. And along the way, I got introduced to lacrosse, and that was the best team in my high school, and I wanted to be a part of that group of athletes and coaches who were really striving for excellence, and I was really drawn to them, and so they drafted me to become the lacrosse goalie, which I remember watching the sport and being like, who's the crazy person who stands in net? And then I got an opportunity to step in and give it a go, and I just loved the team that I was a part of. So if you had asked me my sophomore year in high school if I was going to play a sport in college, I would have said yes, I would hope to, but I probably would not have guessed that it would have been lacrosse. But by the end of my junior year, I realized that I loved it, and there were some great opportunities. And for me, it was really about how do I use lacrosse to get a great education and play at the highest level. And I was fortunate enough that Harvard came calling, and it was a tremendous experience, and one that I look back on and realize it was quite a charmed experience. In fact, in college, we played in 3 national title games in 4 years, and
Wow.
winning as a sophomore, and unfortunately losing in overtime as a senior. But just an incredible experience with a very talented group of people, a fantastic coach, and a team that just had that special connection that I think is essential to achieve anything great in life. And so I'm just very, very grateful to have had that experience as well as a world-class education at Harvard.
Yeah. I love that. And I think first it's so almost funny to me because you remember the losses, right? Like years ago, you still remember the sour taste of losing in overtime. So I just yeah, I love that
Absolutely.
aspect to it.
Sadly, yes. Fortunately, there wasn't a
Exactly.
lot of losing, but you do remember those moments.
Right. And you sounded like those 4 years where you guys absolutely dominated, which is amazing. Okay. But Sarah, before even Harvard, I know you obviously are an entrepreneur at heart. And I'm curious from listening to maybe other podcasts with you, I know you have entrepreneurs in your family and also women
Mm,
entrepreneurs, maybe your grandma, I believe. So walk me a little
yes.
bit through that of having that almost ingrained in you potentially, or how you think that fed into who you are today or later on.
I'm so glad you brought this up because I think as a child, I took it for granted that I had a grandmother who started a business with her 2 brothers, and really she ran the business for all intents and purposes. And when you grow up around that, it becomes normalized. I didn't think it was so unusual that I had a grandmother who was running a multi-million-dollar business. And what I do remember is going into the bank with her and just watching how people respected her and really looked up to her. And that was something that stayed with me. And it wasn't until I got to college, and sadly she had passed away by this time, that I started to recognize that that was unusual, to be able to have that type of example for someone in your life. And so, they say if you can see it, you can be it. And I think for me, it was just incredibly normal, with the idea that women could go out there and be leaders and build companies and be very successful, and also the respect that came along with that. I think it also tied into the whole idea that if you did the hard work and you could build it, you could build something really valuable. So there was something about that was much more of a meritocracy than what you saw out in the world. And so, in addition to my grandmother, my grandfather was an entrepreneur, my dad became an entrepreneur, my uncle was an entrepreneur. So this was something that was quite normalized as a path that was respected and something that was worth considering. And yet, I would honestly say I didn't know at the time that I was in college that that's where I was going to land. It was probably in the back of my mind, but I think the biggest takeaway was, if you do the hard work, if you go out there and build something, you can build something of great value. And with that comes opportunities and respect. And that was something that was ingrained in me in a very, very young age. And I'm forever grateful for it.
Yeah, and it's also just, it's almost the power of exposure, right? And it may not even be active exposure. It's more passive and just going through it. But having that in your own experience, in your toolkit, really helps and comes through in other ways. So that's awesome. And
I
so,
totally agree.
like you said, at Harvard, you ended up studying and getting a degree in economics. And so, when you look at your career, nothing really points to finance focus per se. You went into product management, marketing, growth, things like on that spectrum. So I'm curious, how did you end up choosing econ? And ultimately, how were you thinking of your career actually post Harvard?
It's a great question. And so much about college, I think, should be about exploration and discovery. And I found myself interested in the professors and the topics that we were talking about. Harvard has an incredible economics department, and I was just really drawn to learning from them and being exposed to their insights. And part of it was like a lot of people, I probably thought, oh, maybe I'll go into banking, maybe I'll go into consulting. And in fact, I did a summer internship where I was exposed to the world of banking. And I walked away from that saying, that was okay, but it wasn't great. And I think a big part of it was it did not feel like a team dynamic that I loved. And a lot of people didn't love what they were doing, and that was noticeable. So I remember walking away from that experience, which I was grateful. I had taken 2.5 months to be in a bank, to get exposure to it. People were great. I learned a ton, but I didn't find myself being excited about going into work every single day. It felt like work. And juxtapose that to the summer after my junior year, on a bit of a flyer, I interviewed with a small company out in Redmond, Washington, a software company, for a summer internship. And frankly, I did it so I could get a flight across the country to visit a friend of mine. And I got there, and the company was Microsoft. And I interviewed, and I got excited about the opportunity. And so I spent the summer working in Redmond, Washington at Microsoft, and I worked twice as hard. It was intense, but I loved it. And I loved being a part of a team that was building something. And you got to listen to those signals if you get
Sarah,
them.
you froze on me.
And it wasn't an easy decision to take that job. It was actually the lowest paying job I was offered. It was the furthest from home. And yet I felt like this was a special opportunity for me to learn really valuable skills and to do something that also just excited me. And that was something that felt really important as I embarked on my professional journey. And so I ended up spending 5 years at Microsoft as a product manager, and I got to launch Microsoft Office and really be a part of a rocket ship, which obviously changed the trajectory of my career.
And I love, because you say this so casually, right? Launching Microsoft Office, that obviously was a huge product that everyone was using this. And I'd love to even tap into that a bit. What was it the ownership of the product, or what was the most exciting, what factor gave you the most energy as a PM for this product that was in the hands of, millions of users?
Now, I should be clear. I was a part of a team, and I was a team of 20 people that were in charge of launching this product. So,
right.
I don't want you to think it was a solo effort.
You launched
by any
it
stretch.
only. Yes.
No, that is not true. And you say it as if Microsoft Office was preordained to be hugely successful. At the time that we launched, the dominant players were actually Lotus 1-2-3 and WordPerfect. And so some of this was we were the underdog, and that was super fun to be a part of. I think for me, what I enjoyed was we came together as a group. We set a lofty goal. It was really hard. It was not a foregone conclusion that it was going to be successful. And you felt ownership for a piece of that. I remember being like, I can't take a day off from work. Like, people are counting on me. And that starts with your team, but it's actually the whole company. And then it's obviously your customer base that's out there. And those experiences felt like you could really move the needle. And I think part of what I enjoyed most about Microsoft, and this sounds strange in a company that at the time had 7,000, 8,000 employees, but I think that there was a culture where you felt like your work had a direct impact on the success of the business. And I think as an athlete, you get used to, I have a role on the team and the team is counting on me. And at Microsoft, I was able to tap into that and to be a part of a team that was building something great. And then obviously you get the feedback that it's working, which then just motivates and energizes you to double down and push even harder to make it successful. So I think the average age at the time at Microsoft was about 27, 28 years old. And it just was an exciting place to be where you felt like the thing that you were responsible for within 6 months to a year, you were the expert in, and everyone in the company would look at you at that piece of the puzzle and was counting on you to deliver your part. It was a really important experience for me about learning how you build culture and how you scale that beyond just the founding team.
And Sarah, speaking of which, of how you learned that importance of scaling culture, at this point as well, did you have this concept in the back of your mind saying, one day I'll be founding my own company? Or when did that seed really get put in?
There was definitely a point at Microsoft as the company was getting bigger and bigger, and we were out of necessity adding in more structure and more processes that I felt like, wow, I really like being on this small team and thinking about having a huge impact. So I think at that point, there was in the back of my mind, I had incredible respect for the leaders of Microsoft, Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. And there was something about the energy of what they had really built over the course of the time that I was there, and even before that, that was inspiring. And I can't say that I said, oh, I'm going to go create the next, I'm going to go be the next Bill Gates. But I was definitely inspired by the idea that you could create something out of nothing. And with that, you could create a culture of the organization. And that definitely was intriguing to me at the time. But I also knew I had a lot still to learn about how do you start a company? How do you build it? How do you scale it? It's one thing to do that at Microsoft, but to do that from day zero, that's a different set of skills that I felt like I still had to learn.
And so ultimately, you spend around 5 years at Microsoft, and then you decide to go spend a year at Greylock in VC, which is, very different than the energy that you get from a startup and building products. So walk me a bit through that decision. What made you go into VC? Was this long term or more just to experience that?
Yeah, well, I had made the decision to go back to graduate school and to go to Harvard Business School, which brought me back to Boston. And that was a mix of an investment in my long-term career, but also an opportunity to get back to New England at a time where it felt important for me personally to be back. And when I finished up at Harvard Business School, I wanted to try and stay in Boston. And I was looking for early stage companies to join. And I got to know the folks over at Greylock. And they basically said, why don't you come here and look at the companies that we're investing in? They were at the time based in Boston, and they saw everything that happened in Boston. And so it felt like a great perch from which to see what was available in Boston at the time. Because I wanted to be here in New England. But the reality was things were just exploding out in the Bay Area. And I couldn't ignore the fact that huge opportunities and great companies and companies that I was interested in, which at the time I realized I was interested in companies that focused on consumers and end users. That was the pull that brought me out to the West Coast again, and this time to the Bay Area. And but I was incredibly grateful for the opportunity to be able to see so many high quality companies and work with the partners at Greylock. So it was a very fruitful year, and I treasure those relationships even today.
And I assume through that exploration of these exciting companies, tech companies coming out of Silicon Valley, you discovered Epinions. So
That's right.
walk me a bit through that process, going to be a VP of product and marketing at Epinions. When did you discover, this almost sense and this level of, heightened sense of marketing, right? And what that looks like, and becoming a VP as well. So walk me a little bit through that process and how that experience was.
Well, I didn't start off in that role right out of the gate. In fact, for me, choosing to join Epinions was as much about the people, the founding team that I was very drawn to, as well as what they were trying to do. So you have to kind of roll back the tape a little bit and go back to 1999, 2000, and the internet burst onto the scene. And all of a sudden, this idea that anyone can publish on a platform that just did not exist before. And so I was very excited with the idea of the democratic nature of the internet and what possibilities. And I met a team of people who really understood this and was willing to try and build something that just simply didn't exist before. And that was the first platform where anyone could write reviews about products and services. And frankly, I didn't spend a lot of time being focused on what specific role I would have on day one. In fact, I had some crazy title like the director of OEM products, which we now laugh about because what was that? But that wasn't the point. The point was I joined the team before we launched the product and when we had less than 15 people on the team. And at that point, you're just rolling up your sleeves and trying to figure out what does the team need to move the product forward to launch. And I found myself getting pulled both in the direction of product management, but also trying to figure out how do you help people become aware of Epinions? How do you grow it? And that was the marketing piece of it. But it was much more a question of where did the team need me at any given point in time. And so I went back and forth between running product, or running marketing, the content piece of it. And I loved it. I loved it. But what I was motivated by was not title, role. It was like, how do we make this company successful? And while we had a lot of great things happen to us early on with Epinions, we did find ourselves at the time of kind of the market slowdown trying to rethink our entire business model. And we had grown to be about 100 employees. And we had to go through the process of really shrinking that down because the market had contracted. And that required 2 rounds of layoffs, which were incredibly difficult. But we got the team down really small, hunkered down, changed the business model, and launched it in the fall of 2001. And by the end of that year, we had our first profitable month. But I just bring that up like it's less about title and it's more about what does the team need to succeed and sometimes even to survive.
Yeah. And Sarah, I can go in a couple different directions, but around that time as well, as you mentioned, it was also a downturn and there was challenges and you had to go through layoffs. I'm curious, take me through that mindset that you had to take on, as well as also, did you consider, okay, maybe I need to go to a plan B or a safer job, or, or have you always had this almost risk appetite that you had to fulfill? But walk me through that mindset that you had during that time.
Well, I'm not a fan of risk just for risk's sake. I try and be smart about the risk reward that's going on there. And there were certainly times where there was a gut check. Do I want to stay here? And I remember talking about this with the company and some of the things that I really thought about at the time. And to me, there was this question about, okay, number one, do I believe in the long-term direction of the company? And I believed that people were increasingly going to turn to the internet for information about what to buy and get the advice of other people. And I could see it in the data. While there was a market downturn, usage of Epinions was consistent throughout that entire time. And so that was a really important leading indicator. The second kind of gut check that I did was around, am I learning valuable skills that are expanding my toolkit for the long term? Or do I feel like I'm petering out and I need to go learn? And the answer to that was yes. If I wanted to be an entrepreneur, you had to learn how to manage through the ups and downs and the downturn. And so to me, I felt like I could go work at a big company and a safer job, but that's not along the path of wanting to be an entrepreneur and a founder in my own right. And so this was a great place for me to be, to learn about how to navigate these issues. And then the third thing that I think is really important is, did I enjoy the people I was working with every single day? Because if you don't enjoy going into work every day and being kind of in the bunker with your fellow teammates, it's going to be hard to keep pushing hard through the ups and downs. And I constantly ask myself, can I say yes to those three gut check questions? Do I feel great about the people? Do I feel great about my own learning? And do I believe in the long-term opportunity that is in front of the company? And I shared that with folks on the team. And I think it helps to remember, like, why are you doing this and what are you getting out of this? And I will say that there were a lot of people that I knew from business school and other parts of my life who were chasing opportunities and frankly wasted time there. But it was not easy. There were a lot of people like, why are you still at that company? And of course, we turned it around. We merged with Deal Time. We rebranded shopping.com, and then we take it public. And everyone's like, wow, that was great. What a good call. And I kind of laugh. I was like, you got to enjoy the journey along the way. It's not, you can't evaluate that experience just based on the outcome. You got to feel like you're learning and developing along the way.
I love that. And it's also so tangible as well. And I'm curious, and this could be more general question, but oftentimes you're forced to do a gut check in times of when challenging times, right? When shit's hitting the fan, then you're like, okay, let me reconsider. I'm curious, do you ever intentionally, pull yourself out of a situation and evaluate, okay, am I growing? Am I learning? Do I love the people I'm working with? Or does it tend to just happen when things are hard?
I think it's a good gut check to do at least once a year in any role that you are in. And I'm one of those people at the beginning of the year where I tend to reflect on the past year and think about the year ahead. But there's no doubt that oftentimes in a startup, you are so in the weeds of what you're doing, you don't get a chance to pick your head up and necessarily evaluate, where am I and what am I doing and is this the right place to be. But I think for a lot of people it tends to happen when they're starting to feel something is not right. And so for me, I felt like there were times where I had to do that gut check, in part because as a leader, people were coming to me and they're asking me, why are you so excited about being here? And I would share this framework with them and hopefully create an open dialogue, because as a leader, I can talk about the business opportunity, but I want to be able to talk to them about where are the opportunities for growth for them. Because I think a great job is one where you can bring expertise, but there's also a piece of it that is you're growing and developing and you're excited by that opportunity to continue to progress. And that's, again, it's not about titles, it's more about experiences. The titles and the promotions, those tend to follow along, but are you expanding your skill set and are you growing? And I think that's incredibly important in the first 10, 15 years of your career, but it continues to extend well beyond that.
Yeah. So perfect segue into being a true leader and the driver's seat of your own company. And you ultimately decide, okay, you're going to leave eBay. And from my understanding, you become an EIR, an entrepreneur in residence at Benchmark. So take me through that process. You eventually found a company called Fanbase, didn't go as you expected. And then we'll get to Nextdoor, obviously, but take me through that experience. What was it like founding Fanbase? And yeah.
Well, I'm so glad I get to talk about Fanbase and the pivot. We can now look back on that fondly, but obviously it didn't work out quite the way that we wanted to. But let's go back to the founding and the decision to start a company. And for me, that really started off with, you can think about, well, what do you want to start a company? How are you going to go to market? And who are you going to do it with? And for me, I started with the who first. I felt like that was really important. And my co-founder, Nirav Tolia, and I had worked together at Epinions. We had been through the ups and downs. We had been in the bunker together and knew what it was like to work with one another. So we started with the people first. And then from there came up with the idea around building Fanbase, which was intended to be one of the largest communities for college and pro sports fans. And we had lots of experience in building online communities. We saw that there was an intense kind of passion that people had around sports. We're like, we want to tap into that to build something great. And frankly, we went off to the races. We raised money. We built a team. We spent almost a year and a half building a product. We went out. It got a lot of attention. We got millions and millions of users. And so it all seemed great on the surface. But as we were looking at the usage patterns, we were seeing that people were not sticking around. We were not getting high retention. And so we spent several months trying to, quote unquote, fix that. And we're struggling. And it's not easy to bring a founding team together and look at each other and say, this doesn't seem to be working. We were not quitters, right? Like the persistence that we had money in the bank, and yet it just did not feel like we were building the next great company. And so we went to our lead investor, Bill Gurley, and we offered to give the money back.
And Sarah, even before even pivoting, right? I also heard that you spent those around 14 months discovering what will we build. You came up with Fanbase, but you actually didn't really share it with anyone. You kept it pretty secretive. And so walk me through that reasoning, right? And whether you think there's value in that, right? Maybe to avoid naysayers and to avoid any negativity around it, or, the opposite, where you actually get good feedback. And how do you think through that process?
Yeah, I think we unfortunately kept it secret. I'm actually not a fan of that based on my experience with Fanbase. I think that there's so much value in getting concrete feedback from your actual users. And we did get feedback. We got feedback from people in the industry, really smart people. Sounds like a great idea. So there was definitely positive signal, but I think going off and building for 14 months without a lot of user feedback was a huge mistake that we made. And it's one of the biggest lessons that I take away from Fanbase that I think informed how we changed things on when we started to go after the idea for Nextdoor. And a lot of that just is about what a lot of people now call lean startup, which is really around coming up with a hypothesis, testing it, getting out of the building and actually learning what people like. And there's this balance that you have as an entrepreneur of, do you have an insight about an opportunity? Great, you have an insight. Well, you got to be careful because us entrepreneurs, we can talk ourselves into a lot of things, and you need to go out there and actually test that with real users, with people who really don't have a vested interest in your success other than, is this a product that's going to help me solve a problem that I have? And so it was just, we made every classic mistake about building, and then we wanted it to be perfect, but you're not getting feedback from the market, so you don't know exactly where to focus to improve the product. And you find yourself spending 14, 16 months building something and then launch it and realizing that you've missed the mark, but you don't know exactly where you missed the mark. So it was a very, look, it was a failure, and it did not work out, but it was an incredibly valuable opportunity to learn how to think about coming up with ideas, how to develop the hypothesis, how to build a simple prototype and get feedback. And so that informed everything that we did when we actually went back to the drawing board. And fortunately, our investors said, hey, we invested in the team. Why don't you spend some time over the summer and work on new ideas. And we worked on 4 or 5 different ideas, but each one of them we would go out and interview people and do surveys and build a simple prototype or mock-ups. And so ideas would float to the top and then take a step backwards on something that we didn't quite get right. And one of those ideas was what we now know of as Nextdoor. And but I'll tell you, the original kind of germ of an idea of Nextdoor got refined quite a bit in those first 3 months before we ever wrote a line of code. And that was based on probably 20 or 30 conversations with different neighbors across the country, showing them simple prototypes, getting feedback, and whittling down the idea to the essence of where we thought that there was an opportunity. And I think far too often, entrepreneurs, especially product people, want to go build something quickly. And that was part of the mistake that we made with Fanbase that I think we corrected with Nextdoor. And as a result, we were in private beta working with customers for almost a year before we officially launched. And the solutions to problems that we came up with were not theoretical. They were not driven by what's the easiest to build. It was driven by, is this going to solve the problem for our users? And then we would figure out a way to build it. And so it totally changed the way that I think about building products and bringing them to market, and really lead with finding that product market fit as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, and then iterating based on what you learn from those users.
Yeah. And when did you realize that there is a real difference from Fanbase to Nextdoor, right? Because at Fanbase, you mentioned you had millions of users a month. You had people, visitors going to the site, going to that platform. But like you said, you didn't necessarily reach that true product market fit. So when did you realize that, you know what, Nextdoor, there's something here. You have the confidence. Now let's go build.
Well, we spent time building a simple prototype of Nextdoor, and we launched it with one neighborhood. And within a few weeks, I was getting inbounds from those users about new features that they wanted, new capabilities that they wanted. So that was a pretty good sign. But we're like, that's one neighborhood. Then we launched 3 more neighborhoods, and we kept getting feedback of more things that they wanted. I think the place where we really knew that we were onto something was very early on. We only had a team of about 7 of us working on this, and we needed to upgrade the database. And we decided to do it in the middle of the day so the engineers could watch it. And they actually did it right before we went to lunch, because we thought I think we might have had 75 people on the platform at the time. And so we took the database down, they were upgrading it in the middle of the day, and we're walking to lunch, and all of a sudden my phone is blowing up because people are contacting me like, wait a minute, like, why is Nextdoor offline? I want to be able to get in touch with someone. I need to talk to them. I was like, wow, there was real demand that was being pulled through by our users. And that was a sign to me that we were really onto something. Wow. You know, the idea of like, if you took it away, would they scream? We heard the screams. It was an unintended experiment, and we never did that again to the database in the middle of the day. But it was a very early sign that people wanted it. When I would tell people the idea, they would reach out like, when can I bring this to my neighborhood? These were all signs that you were actually tapping into something that users were looking for in their lives. And then it was all about our ability to test and iterate and deliver a solution that would work for people on a daily basis.
Yeah. And you touch on so many factors that I've learned from Mike, right? At Floodgate, it's having that almost desperation that, you know, is it built right now? Can I use it right now? And then also when you take it away from them, what is their reaction? Are they fine? Maybe that's not a good thing, you know? So I love that. And Sarah, I want to touch real fast on culture. Okay, beyond Nextdoor, obviously you realize you have something here, and now it's all let's go to the races, let's grow, and let's expand our neighborhoods, but also our team. And so I may have spoken to Ceci, who is your co-captain of the Harvard women's lacrosse team, just to get a
Nice.
sense. And I think, it seems pretty real across the board throughout your career that you have this tremendous power to bring community together and to make everyone feel part of a bigger goal. And so I want to know, how has, and maybe, from lacrosse days or not, how has that seeped into the culture that you instilled in Nextdoor? How are you thinking of culture, especially as it scaled?
Well, I'm glad you bring up Cece. She my
Cece, yeah.
co-captain from college, and someone who has been a teammate for 30 years. And I think it cannot be overstated, learning early in life the value of the team coming together. And for me, that was lacrosse when I was in college, and having that experience. And I think when you have that experience early on in your life, you're looking for ways to repeat it. And so you fast forward then to Microsoft and that experience of bringing people together, having a shared goal, working hard towards it, the ups and the downs, and figuring it out. To me, it comes down to people. And that was one of the things that was really an important ingredient with Nextdoor. So like my co-captain, my co-founder at Nextdoor, Nirav and I had that connection. We had seen what it took to keep the team together during the tough days at Epinions. And a lot of that is really at the core of having a mission that you believe in. And one of the things that was great about Nextdoor, we had a mission that everyone was excited about. And this idea of being able to bring local community together and all the tangible benefits that you get when that happens, that was something that was motivating to everyone. We also wanted to make sure that everyone felt like an owner, right? So some of that is the incentive structure, but it was also how we shared information with everyone in the organization so they understood some of the hard decisions and trade-offs. They weren't thinking like, whoa, why did we do X, Y, and Z? They were as part of the team that was making Nextdoor increasingly more valuable and successful. They were a part of that decision making. And so I think that from the very beginning, the types of people that we were recruiting into the organization, they cared about our mission, they were aligned with what we were trying to do, and then we gave them big, meaty jobs and gave them the space to run with it. So a lot of these are things that I learned at Microsoft, right? That idea of impact and the value. My co-founder, Nirav, he had been at Yahoo in the early days, and you just know that smart, talented people want to be challenged. They want to be stretched. They want to be counted on. And I think that those were a lot of the seeds that we had at Nextdoor that allowed us to move fast and to grow, but to do it in a thoughtful, long-term way. And that was something that I think we got right. But it came from all of our experiences and the opportunities that we had early in our career to be a part of something that was bigger than ourselves. The other thing I'll just mention is that you want to bring on board people who are excited about making the company successful versus they're just trying to have their own individual experience and their own title growth, and it's all about me, me, me. We wanted people who cared about the collective. And if you took care of that, we all were going to enjoy a lot of personal success.
And do you think for that last part, right, being, the team first rather than individual, do you think that's primarily important just at those early stages when you're still building the DNA of the company? Or do you actually think as it scales, that high bar for, mission, team also is just as important?
I think the most successful companies in the world are the ones that keep that sense of impact and ownership well beyond the early days. Remember when I told you the story about Microsoft, I joined at a time it had been up and running for more than 15 years. And yet here I was, I felt an incredible amount of ownership and purpose, and that I had an impact. That to me is a sign of a great company and a culture. And I think one of the challenging things in a startup is how do you maintain that at a point when you're growing really fast? And for us at Nextdoor, we made hiring a priority. There was always one of the co-founders that were part of the interview process. And then even beyond the co-founders, we were thinking about those first 50 employees. They are culture carriers that help the next level of people who come on board understand that this is how we do things at Nextdoor. And that is something that, let's make it a place that's fun to work, that you're proud of the work that you're doing, and a place where you are growing. And if you can do that, then I think you can recruit and retain super talented people.
I love that term, culture carriers. I think that's great. So
yeah, it's not just the job of the co-founders. It has to permeate the organization.
So walk me through, you ultimately take Nextdoor public and you have that experience of IPOing. And I know when we talked earlier, you mentioned it's maybe equivalent to winning a national championship. So walk me through that experience and then, ultimately how you transition out of Nextdoor.
Yeah, it's, you know this, winning a national championship is a total team effort. And a lot of people focus on the actual event of the winning, but it's all the little steps along the way that make that possible. For me, Nextdoor being publicly listed on the New York Stock Exchange, that was a magical day. It was an awesome milestone, but it's just the beginning of the next chapter. I do think it afforded us the opportunity to just reflect. And what was amazing for me was to hear from dozens and dozens of people who had been a part of that journey, whether those were the early investors, some of our early founding members of our first neighborhoods, or it was people who joined us early on when we were just an idea and a prototype. And for them, some of them had moved on in their careers and had gone to other places, but to hear from them and the gratitude that they had to being a part of that, I probably underestimated how wonderful that would make me feel. And just, again, it's this team of people, this community of people that built Nextdoor over so many years. And for people in the beginning who said, you're crazy to try and build over 200,000 hyper-local social networks, but we found ways to do that. And that's not just something that I did or my co-founders did with me. That's something that the entire team did. And I now look at this and I think a startup is the ultimate team sport. And we don't get that many opportunities as adults to be a part of something like that. But the startup journey is one, you have days that are wins and days that maybe are losses along the way. And how do you recover from that? How do you adapt? How do you adapt strategy? And when you have that experience with people, the bond that you share just continues on for years and decades to come. And so I've been fortunate enough to experience that as a college athlete. I had an experience doing that at Microsoft. I had a version of that at Epinions, and I certainly had that with Nextdoor. And I think that's part of what fuels me even now as an investor. Like, is this a group of people that you want to invest in because they're going to be able to bring together the team, the opportunity, and the product and build something truly, truly special? And I wish for it for every young person out there to be a part of something like that, hopefully earlier in their career. But if you get to do it at any point in your career, you can count yourself lucky.
I love that. Sarah, I love that so much. Okay, I have one more question for you, which is, what is your superpower?
I think where I would focus my attention and the thing that I've realized a little bit over time is this ability to bring people together and align around a common goal, but also to help each individual find where they can contribute and be a part of the team's success. And some of that, you know this because you were a college athlete. Sometimes that's building people up. Sometimes that's maybe hemming them in. But a lot of times it's figuring out how to get the most out of people. It's funny, when I look back on my college career, someone asked me like, oh, as a lacrosse goalie, what was your superpower? And I think my superpower really was getting a defense to work together and feel accountable to each other. I realized that if I could get the defense to help the attack take low percentage shots, I could do my job well, they could do their job well, and we all would be happy. And that, I think, is partly what has translated into my professional life, is how do you bring together different people with different skills that complement each other and get them excited about really stretching for a big, lofty goal together.
And Sarah, I know I just said one more, but I remembered you mentioned on Mike's podcast, and I have to mention this because not only are you an incredible leader, a badass, a powerful leader, but you also are a woman, right? And a female leader in tech. And one thing you mentioned on that podcast, which I love, and I'd love for you to talk about it, is as women, it's good to have ambition and to lean into that. Talk a little bit about what you mean by that and how we as women can really, be incredible founders or the leaders that we want to be.
I think so often for anyone, I think it's maybe a little bit more for women, we hold ourselves back. We don't want to be out in front, and we don't like to be by ourselves out in front. And I will admit, I don't love being out in front by myself, but what I do believe really strongly in is being out in front to help the team succeed. And so the thing that I think I got over was, what is it that I can do to bring the entire team along? It's not about my individual success, but there are times when I have to extend myself to help move the team forward. And I think for me, that makes it less about being internally focused and more being like, that's my role on the team to do this part and to stretch. And sometimes that means putting yourself out there and being ambitious and saying, we want to go build a multi-billion-dollar company. And I feel like people need to just not be afraid to put themselves out there. I think in my entire journey, I've gotten over failing. I'm okay with it. Hopefully I learn from it. Hopefully I don't do it that often. And maybe it comes back to my roots as a lacrosse goalie, where there was a big scoreboard over my head that kept track of every time someone beat me. And I developed a real short memory about that. If you're a big Ted Lasso fan, they'll think like a goldfish. It's really helpful to be willing to put yourself out there. And when it doesn't go right, hopefully learn from it, but then move on and take the next opportunity. And so I think for everyone, but I think in particular, sometimes women will hold back because they don't want to be failing. And I try and encourage people to take smart risk and learn from the failure quickly. Try not to make the same mistake twice, but just don't be afraid of failing, because I think a lot of learning in life comes from our mishaps. Just look at fan base to Nextdoor. I don't think we have the Nextdoor story without the hard lessons that we learned with fan base.
Wow. I love it. Sarah, this is amazing. I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're awesome, but thank you so much.
A real honor to be on the call with you and to be a part of this. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I love what you're doing. Keep telling these stories. It's important for everyone to hear and share and up level.